So we've made some buttons here and some circles, but say we want to group some of these elements together so that they don't move independently every single time we go to move them. Well, you can select two things by holding down Shift or just dragging over them both. And when you want to group them, you can do it two ways. Number one, you can come up here and click on Group in the menu, or my favorite, Command G, and very quickly creates a group. Now, the way they've decided to handle groups inside of Sketch is by making a folder. So, groups get dropped down. But I assure you, once something is in a group, when you go to click on it the next time, it stays within the group. You never select the individual layers inside the group. Now, I can go ahead and select this group and say click through when selecting, which means I select one thing within the group. So that's a little quirk with groups, and it's individual per group. So if I group these two things, I can over here say click through when selecting this group, but over here I can say keep this group together. So if I know I'm going to be moving these things around a lot, but this one, for example, may stay the same, I can enable that. So there's lots of things around groups that are pretty cool options when you consider the way Adobe handles their grouping. So now over here, I'm going to disable the click through for now. I'm also going to group this. And so now we have three groups. You can always double click on any layer, just as you would inside of Illustrator or Photoshop, and call it button. Essentially name your layers. Now, one of the key differences here is that groups collapse by default, right? So because you're only clicking on the group, it stays collapsed. You can use this to view your group and it will stay open. Or you can collapse it and it'll stay collapsed. Typically inside of Photoshop or Illustrator, when you click inside of a group, it opens up that group so you can see it. But that'll only happen if you use click through when selecting. Then you select the button, you can see the group opens back up. But you have to select the group again and click through when selecting, turn that off. Now, the next thing about the layers palette that I want to talk to you about is showing and hiding. You have this little eyeball icon that appears that you can click, and I can show and hide each of these elements. They go a little bit gray, and I assure you they are absolutely still there. In fact, when you hover over, you can see you get this outline, which is really handy. Instead of having to look and show, or if your element is very light and very low contrast, you can very quickly go, oh, okay, there it is, I get it. If I hide some of these, you can see it basically just draws a box around where the bounds of it are. So, again, pretty cool, pretty useful. I can also, of course, with the layers palette, drag things around and add groups into other groups by dragging them inside. So if I wanted to, say, show these two things and add them to this group, every time I go to drag these around, we have a mega group. But of course I can select the mega group and say click through when selecting and select these individuals. I can hit delete to delete them, or I can use shift. This works basically the same way as choosing a file in Finder, right? So if you hold down Command, you can get a whole bunch of random ones. If you hold down Shift, you can get them all in a row and drag them right out of that group. Now, position these so they're all spaced out. The other thing you can do here is take objects and sort of merge them together with this. And the way I would do that is take, say, oval over here, and drag it into this oval, like I'm doing that with a group. And you can see it combines the paths, but it keeps it as one shape. And that one shape now shares color properties, and now shares order properties or stroke properties. It's essentially one shape. And if I wanted to take these two shapes and drag those into here, you can see they inherit this very thing. And just like inside of Illustrator, you can double click and get to the individual elements. I'll just take those and add them all together like this. And you can see when you go to move them around, or if I hid them, and I go to hover over, I get the outline as if they were one thing. And of course, if I gave them, say, a shadow, they would give me one big shadow that incorporates the whole group. If I went for a gradient, so you can see merging shapes is pretty easy. There's also this flatten command, which does some stuff that we're going to talk about. And we have these operations, these Boolean operations, that we're going to get to. But that is grouping. So you can group shapes or combine shapes, and of course, drop down and take a path and say pull it out, and it keeps its own property. It sort of pulls or inherits the group property, so if it was related to these at one point, it still gets the same fill, the same shadow, but it becomes its own. One of the differences is when you put it all in the oval, they all became paths. When you pull it out, they're still named paths, so you sort of altered the name of what you did. But if I wanted these two things back in the mix, I can just take them, drag them back in. And we have one object again. Very odd looking object, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. So that's grouping. You can select groups. They stay locked into their selection. You can use the option to take a group and click through when you're selecting it. I'm going to take this group and uncheck that. Once you have things in groups, the last thing I want to talk about is you can do certain things to them, like change their blending style. There's darken, there's multiply, there's lighten, obviously all the basic blending styles. You can apply shadows to the group itself. So if I wanted to do, say, a red shadow, just to show you, there's a black shadow, then a red shadow. It's a little hard to see. Now you can see it a little bit better. And then, of course, you can adjust the overall opacity of a group of things. So that's some of the quirks when it comes to grouping. And some of the intricacies of combining shapes in an easy way. Next, let's try our hand at making a basic icon. Let's say a cloud. There's somebody else that did a tutorial on this, and I think it's a really simple way to sort of get you acquainted with how you might use these shape tools and their grouping. That's coming up next.